Welcome. Today we continue our series on defining great leaders. And we have a leadership principle we've been working with now for 3 weeks that says we must realize the possibilities. Great leaders have to be discovered. They have to be found. They have to be invested in. And so today I want to talk to you about something that's very important to me, and that's the leadership principles of Jesus. And these principles have inspired me over the years, and I want to share those with you because I think they're the most important principles that we could ever invest our lives in. First, Jesus was willing to invest in people others would deem dismiss. No one would have ever thought Simon Peter or these other disciples were worthy of being leaders. They weren't the religious elite. They weren't the people that people would invest in. I mean, these were fishermen. They had no education. They had no seminary. They had no leadership skills. But yet Jesus focused his whole ministry on these 12 individuals because Jesus released responsibility and ownership in a ministry. Consider how Jesus sent the disciples out on their own. There was no micromanagement. He didn't just look at every little thing that they did. Jesus had a leadership succession plan. Jesus consistently reminded the disciples that he wouldn't always be with them. Of course, he was still the leader, but he left others to take the ministry forward. And then Jesus practiced servant leadership better than anyone. The King of Kings was willing to wash the feet of his own followers. How many of us are willing to do that? Jesus was laser focused on his vision. Regardless of the persecution or distractions, Jesus kept on the mission God had called him to do. Continually he said, "For this reason I came. For this reason I am going. For this reason I am going to die." He was always laser focused on the end result that God had called him to complete. And then Jesus handled distractions with grace. When the woman who had been bleeding for 12 years touched his garment, Jesus stopped to heal her, even though he was headed for a definite purpose. He stopped and took time to be with her. There was his end goal was important, but he knew his time was there and God had already set it up. It would be a matter of time. So Jesus knew that he needed to focus on this woman and provide healing for her life. And then Jesus was into self-discipline or self-development. Jesus constantly slipped away to spend time with the Father. It says in the Bible that Jesus went up into the mountain to pray. Or when it was still dark, Jesus went off to pray. Jesus spent time with God. He would say to his disciples, I do what I see my Father doing. And then he did it. He had to be with the Father in order to know that and to realize that. You see, Jesus was into leadership development and replacement. He very purposely prepared the disciples to take over the ministry. He pushed people beyond what others would thought he was even capable of. Jesus pushed them to the end result of what he was looking for. He wanted them to be tested, to be tried, and to be true. And Jesus was willing to push them to that extreme. And then Jesus held followers to a high expectation. Jesus was not afraid to make huge requests to people. He said, "Follow me." And he meant his disciples had to drop everything in their agenda and do what he told them to do. He said, if you're going to be my disciples, you have to do this. If you're going to follow me, you're going to have to do that. And so he was laser focused on what Jesus wanted them to do, and that's where he was headed, and that's what he wanted them to do. He told his disciples that they must be willing to lose everything to follow him. The price that had to be paid to be a leader was so important. And the price is no different today. You ask leaders to pay a price to be under your leadership. You expect them to follow your leadership. But your example is Jesus. You see, Jesus cared more about people than about rules and regulation. He was willing to jeopardize himself by breaking the rules. You remember they were off doing some things one day, and Jesus realized that his disciples were hungry, and it was the Sabbath. He just went over and got some wheat. Boy, did the religious elite come down on him. They came down on him with both feet, but Jesus felt like it was more important to take care of the needs than it was to follow the rules and regulation. It's so important that we do the same. And then Jesus celebrated success in ministry. He rewarded people generously who were faithful to him and his cause. See, whenever people were following him, he did more than what he needed to do. For instance, there were 5,000 men, women, and children with Jesus. He took 5 loaves and 2 fish and fed all of them. He didn't have to, but he did that because he wanted to reward people who were faithful to him and his cause. And the thing is, Jesus finished well. Any questions whether his ministry was effective? Still working today. And so if you start following the leadership principles of Jesus, you'll have a guidance, you'll have a direction, you'll have purpose, you'll have significance, you'll have ministry for a long time to come. I'll see you next week when we talk about how to become a leader like Jesus.